There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Contour Community Meeting. Today is July 28th, 2020, and we're going to go through some status updates and then dive into discussions. So let me share my screen. There we go. All right. Who wants to go first?
I can go. I think I'm first. I didn't put my name on it, but the first one's mine. So I know. So a while back, James Peach had done a lot of work to set up some framework for some integration tests, and the idea of these tests was to actually have spin up a real Kubernetes cluster with a real Envoy passive configuration, and then validate. Hey, does Envoy do what we expect it to do? Up until now, we've always done validations, what we call feature tests or EDE tests. And all we do is basically validate the configuration that we would send to Envoy. So assuming that Envoy consumes that configuration correctly, it was a quick, easy way to run through tests, but then also see that, hey, given these inputs of services and secrets and ingress resources, all those different things, does it produce the correct, set of listeners, set of clusters, endpoints, that sort of thing. But since then, we found some cases where that doesn't do enough. So there are some times where even validating that config hasn't found issues in Contour that we've come up or run into. So we have some of these tests now. So part of my goal is that I want to help expand these tests because I feel like they're beneficial for lots of different reasons. As we grow Contour, as we grow users and things, I think these will be important. The trade-off is that they take longer to run, as all integration tests do, and they can be flaky as well. So what I did initially was that I turned on these tests to run on PRs now. So on every test, these will run through all those different CI things. So hopefully we can flush out some of those flaky tests or things like that we run into now before we generate or develop too much of it, and then have issues of like, hey, I'm not sure what's going on here or what's going on there. So that's all. So if you send PRs or look at PRs, you'll see them take a little longer now. So those are those tests that we're running.
Steve, do you have any sense of for any flakes that you're seeing? Like what are some of the reasons behind those?
I know there was one I had an issue with, which I chatted with James, and he said it was a timing issue where the container wouldn't come up in time. So I since added it to, we do, so we use Kind as the infrastructure for Kubernetes. And there's a way that you can sideload images into that cluster. So instead of having to download it from the internet. So I'm sideloading that in now, and it seems like that has fixed that seemingly now. But it would just be like on my machine, I'd run it, it would work. The next time I'd run it, it wouldn't. And I know in Travis, I ran it a few times, and it was sort of flaky. But the last few that I've been watching have been pretty stable. So again, this is what I wanted to get out of it. If they start failing over and over and over, then it'll help tell us, what's going on there.
All right, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Next up, I guess this is Steve Chris.
Yeah, this is me. I've been working on adding configurable minimum and maximum values for response timeouts. So the HTTP proxy allows you to specify a per route response timeout and also specify this on an ingress resource using annotations. But the issue there is that individual users or application owners could potentially put response timeouts that the Contour or the proxy administrator doesn't want to allow. So, you can put an infinite timeout on all of your requests or all of your responses, which may not be desirable if there's a sort of a centralized proxy. So this PR adds minimum and maximum settings to the config file. They're optional, but if they're specified, then the Contour administrator can say, this is the valid range for these timeouts, and any proxy that specifies a value outside of that will be marked as invalid. So I just put this PR up a few minutes ago. It's still in draft because I'm still doing some testing, but I've got all the unit tests in there and everything, and things look to be working correctly, but I want to do a little bit more testing before it's really ready for review.
Cool, thank you. Any questions, comments for Steve? All right, Michael.
So before we go directly to my item, our goal is to get a new release out in the next couple of days. So I know a few folks are looking into that. So seems like we're tracking well. So we should be able to cut a new release that will support Envoy 115 and a couple of changes that came in. I don't know, Steve Slugger, do you know who fixed that that last issue that came in from on Contour? I actually find the ticket number really quickly.
Was that for the fallback stuff?
That was the issue 2720. Yeah, the fallback certificate.
Yeah, so I believe James did that fix. So there were two PRs for that. One was to push in the secret wasn't getting pulled into the cache, I think, and then there was some a route filter not getting added to the fallback cert path. So those have been merged. Yeah.
Yeah, and that will also make it to the release. So, sorry to put you on the spot, Steve. I wasn't sure if you fixed it or not, so I only had the ticket number. Thank you. And the last thing is, if any of you have been a member of the Google group that we had for Contour, you should have gotten an email both in the Google group as well as an invitation to the new mailing list that we have, which is on the CNCF mailing list. So the new list is called CNCF Contour Users. It has the same kind of moderation, and you can get individual emails, you can get digests, you get to decide how you want to configure it. So please sign up to this list. That's where we're going to send release announcements. That's where you can have discussion around Contour. If you have questions that you don't want to post on Slack, that's another area to have a discussion. So please join that, because the Google group will not be used moving forward.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Make sure you join there so you can get all the meeting invites and everything else. Super important. Thank you, Michael.
Hey, can I just
Go ahead,
can I go back to that fallback cert thing for just a second? So we've been building from main. I'm trying to use the new terminology. I don't know what the plans are for the project to change the terminology, but we've been building from the main branch. We validated that the curl is now working with the fallback, and I've asked the team to test against our F5 load balancers, which can't issue SNI based HTTPS health checks. That's going to be another check, so we're going to try and do that. But looks like the fallback stuff is getting closer to working. So we'll have some more news later today.
Excellent. If just hit us up on Slack, either privately or in the Contour channel, and we can have a discussion if something's not behaving as expected.
Cool.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, any discussion topics that anyone wants to bring up for the meeting today?
Quick question on the new feature to limit the ranges of valid timeout values. Is this the case that, an HTTP proxy that would have an invalid out of range value would be marked as invalid, or would it be refused outright through some admission control?
Currently it's being marked invalid, so it has to go kind of through the processing for Contour to detect that it's outside of the range specified within the config file.
Okay, and is there sort of ongoing discussions about admission control in general with regards to CRDs for Contour? Because it seems it's getting sort of out of sync with the way things work in Kubernetes in general. Like I'm thinking limit range objects and admission control is sort of synchronous in the sense that you can't even create those resources. But now with Contour, we can create them in invalid states, and they just sort of linger around with those invalid values. I wonder if there's any discussion ongoing on that.
So I know those have come up before. So some of the things that are frustrating is when you submit a config and then you go see does it work, and it won't work, and you check the status and you see, oh, look, the status on the object is invalid. So there's a couple things with that. So one is we're adding a condition spec to the status field, which doesn't answer your question, but that's just a new thing that I know Nick was working on. So instead of having just basically a thumbs up or thumbs down, we'll be able to set a set of conditions now of like, hey, these 5 things are wrong with your proxy or your ingress or whatever. But part B, I think, is getting that feedback loop back to the user faster. So things like you're mentioning, like, hey, if I set, an out of range config or something like that, then the user should be able to get response kind of more real time before it hits the API server. Because you're right, I think in the current design, or the current implementation, if you set those things, you can break your resources. Because when you become invalid, then they get thrown out of Contour. So it's a bad state to be in terms of if someone just makes a bad configuration, then all of a sudden all of your ingress resources go down. So I think it's something that we've talked about, we just haven't ever implemented. There are some pieces we've set in the CRD validation spec, but sometimes those aren't as helpful or as useful as they could be. Whereas a real admission controller would be able to help better.
Great.
So
Thank you. Yeah.
Good. Half of an answer.
To give you a little bit of context, we have other cases of validation we'd like to implement, and we're considering admission control for that. We have our own homebrew way of delivering TLS certificate automatically for HTTP proxies, which we implemented as a controller that watches the HTTP proxies and binds the newly created secret. But there's still this question of, like, for example, we have limitations on the size of the FQDN we can issue certificates for. And so we're considering adding validation on the FQDN length, which is specific to our deployment. I was wondering if it's better to do it as a condition in the status, or flat out refusing that object from admission control. So it's sort of related if we're introducing these ranges of values that are for timeouts and other stuff.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I personally, I like the idea of having the quick feedback. This thing, hey, you try to apply something, and hey, you're breaking some rule somewhere somehow. I like that. But some of the things, like in terms of knowing Contour, like if you're using like the inclusion model or something, we'd need to have that DAG getting rebuilt in that admission controller somehow, or getting access to that to do those sort of checks on things, which is a little more tricky than just static checks that maybe you're describing, those length requirements and stuff. So yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if there's not an issue, maybe I'll go find one. If you wouldn't mind opening one, we could chat more about some of those use cases that I think would be great.
Sure, I'll do that. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, great, thank you. Any other questions, comments for today? All right.
I'll just sorry, wanted to chuck in there. I raised a new issue today. It may be a dupe, but it's we raised an old issue. It was closed as a dupe. There's still an ongoing issue, but it's basically 404s on well, the absence of 404s on non-existent URLs and wildcards. So it seems like it's regressed a little. In 1.3, it would generate, if you tried to hit a URL that didn't exist, it would create an SSL error, which is not super ideal, but at least it would fail in the browser. But now in 1.6, it doesn't fail. It just hangs a connection on a non-existent URL. So ideally, what we'd like is for a non-existent URL for it to 404, as you'd expect. So just raise a new issue on that. So just when we get a chance.
Do you have the issue number handy, really quickly?
Yeah, hang on.
I believe it's 2738.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I looked into this. I'll have to see why it changed. I know there's been a bunch of work with refactoring how SNI gets configured and stuff, but I know there was a fix in Envoy to allow us to set now a certain error code or error message.
Yes.
Which would be great. So there'd be a neat way to say, like, hey, if for all other domains that aren't configured, then return this result or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can.
That same functionality you're referring to, Steve, is what I'm hoping you can use to replace the Lua hack that you've got for that 421 response code as well. So you can take Lua as a dependency out of Envoy.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I have to look at that and see.
But yeah, I mean, ideally, we just obviously a 404 is what would be the expected and desired behavior, and even 1.3, as I said, doesn't do that. So yeah,
Right.
there's not well, yeah, it's not super urgent, but it's not great. But I'll also have a look to see what I can see as well. I just wanted to, based on the testing we did, I think I obfuscated all of our, business stuff out of it, but we did a fair bit of testing on this.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we'll have to see. I remember getting that error before that, the SSL error when something didn't match properly, which still wasn't very, very helpful because like Envoy was working, it just wasn't working the way you thought it was not working. It was functional, I guess. It just wasn't. Yeah, it was just a bad experience there. So
what it does down there now is it basically goes through and it just it sort of makes a connection and then just hangs. So there's no 404, there's no SSL error.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I can have a look and see where it's getting hung up in.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Anyone have anything else to add? All right. Then we're going to close out the meeting for today. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for the discussions here. Have a fantastic rest of the week, everyone, and see you all next week. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.